solve large, intractable problems.
It's a new venture altogether.
Your brain is a wild horse there.
Because remember, writing is not a team sport.
You are not selling horse carriages when there are cars.
I want to be known only as the trusted advisor.
More like a tourist.
Play to Potential podcast.
So this was a term, I asked several CEOs of several companies, what is it in HUL that makes so many of you CEOs? So I asked Gopal Vittal this, who's the CEO of Airtel, and he gave me 2 or 3, but the word that he used was entrepreneur professional. A professional is relatively easy for a multinational to understand, right? Professional means that you follow the process, you follow the rule. That is the etymology of professional. I think the entrepreneurship is a relatively rarer quality. And I was thinking about what is it in HUL that makes people entrepreneur. I think there are a couple of them. One is we get high quality people who are driven to succeed and output oriented. And they're not just people who want to bide their time in the organization. So they want to push. By nature, culture reinforces itself. So you're always having people pushing, saying, how do I grow faster and how do I so on and so forth. I think the second thing is a lot of us have very early exposure to Indian retail trade at a very young age. Our distributors and retailers are the most entrepreneurial, most business-like people. So, and you spend the first 3-4 years day in and day out dealing with really hardcore entrepreneurs who are really sort of, looking at very capital focused. Entrepreneurs are fundamentally capital focused. These guys are capital focused, rotation focused. So you come out of sales with a mindset on business which is highly sort of entrepreneurial. I think these are the two reasons that, and I think it is a self-reinforcing thing. I think culture is reinforcing, and once the culture sets up.
Welcome to the 51st conversation at the Play to Potential podcast. This is your host, Deepak Jayaraman here. I'm an executive coach, and I work with leaders during high-stakes transitions, whether it's related to an organization or the leader's career. I feel just like companies need to be coherent about the 2 questions, where to play and how to win, in the context of their strategy, we all need to be clear about our responses to the 2 questions, where to go and how to grow, as we go through our journeys. I help leaders play to their unique potential by addressing those 2 questions, especially during key points of transition. This conversation is special because I'm interviewing a dear friend of mine for the last 22 odd years, Sudhir Sitapati. Sudhir and I were classmates, section mates rather, in IIM Ahmedabad. He was one of the only people in the batch who had a razor-sharp focus on the fact that he wanted to do marketing and join HUL from day one. Given I've had the time trend view of his journey, it was great to catch up with him and speak about the secret sauce behind HUL in the context of the book he's launched recently. We speak at length about various elements of the book The CEO Factory, published by Juggernaut Books. While in the book, he speaks about various elements of the business, I kept this conversation focused around the 3 themes I'm curious about in the podcast: leadership, transitions, and careers. Without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with my friend Sudhir Sitapati. Sudhir, congratulations on the book.
Hey, thanks, DJ.
The CEO Factory, and thanks for making time for the Play to Potential podcast.
My pleasure.
Before we dive into the book, Sudhir, you share some stunning statistics that you talk about over a 60-year period where the economy multiplied 1,400x, but HUL earnings multiplied 6,000x.
Yeah.
Before we study HUL's, let's say, secret sauce, give us a sense of why we should study it. Give us a significance of the journey.
Yeah. No, HUL, DJ, is quite a remarkable company. There are many remarkable statistics about HUL. One of them, which a lot of people find fascinating, is 9 out of 10 Indians, which is close to 1.15 or 1.2 billion Indians, use an HUL product every month. That's more than, forget Google or Facebook, it's more than electricity, it's more than voting, it's more than people have access to roads. So there is very, very few things in India which will unify people as much as their, usage of an HUL product, which is a kind of a, always worth remembering. But the other really interesting thing about HUL is a very old company. It was really formed 125 years ago, but in its current form in 1958. And when I looked at the annual report of HUL in 1958, I saw that our profits were 1 crore. In the period of 60 years, the company has grown 6,000 times, which is a 15% earnings CAGR over 6 decades. Now, lots of companies have spectacular 10-year records of if you're doubling, trebling, etc. But it's very hard to consistently grow earnings 15%. So, in terms of the financial performance, and in the late 50s when it was formed, it was a top 5 company in India. In 1986, when the Sensex was formed, it was the 4th largest company in terms of market cap. And today, it's the 4th largest company in terms of market cap. So maybe with the exception of General Electric, there are very few companies that have been top of the game for a 60-year period, which actually counts for a lot. It kind of means that the vicissitudes of various external changes notwithstanding, this kind of company has motored on. And then there are other remarkable statistics about HUL. It's well known as a CEO factory. Last when we counted, we were able to count 400 CEOs or CXOs who are from Unilever. Over the last decade, AC Nielsen has a Dream Employer of the Year in the top 20 MBA schools. And I think in 8 of those 10 years, HUL has been number 1. Even in the for example, the return on capital invested, which is a really good measure of how efficient a company is, HUL has close to 100% ROC. Even the CPG averages, and CPG already returns capital very well, is in the 30s. So whether you look at long-term metrics, short-term metrics, sort of consumer metrics, human metrics, and then there's this qualitative thing about, because HUL has been around so long, the HUL style of management has permeated many companies in India. So, you may not know it, but there are parts, I was telling you when I was working with my publisher that many parts of HUL are there in many parts of corporate India. So I guess that's why I think it's a sort of important company worth being studied.
Lovely. And when you say 400, is it Unilever or HUL?
HUL.
Wow.
HUL.
Oh, that's a stunning statistic.
Yeah.
And in my past life as a search consultant, I guess I did some of those placements as well. But I want to take you back in time, Sudhir, close to 2 decades back when we were in IIMA, and you referred to Professor AK Jain and the book, and we were in the same section, and we witnessed some of his marketing genius. You speak about getting the problem right, problem definition right. Talk to us a little bit about what you mean by that in the context of business and marketing.
Yeah.
But maybe if you could also reflect a little bit on how you've applied that in your journey.
Yeah. No, DJ, the HUL and IIMA firstly have a very, very, and I realized this only when I was researching the book, a very, very deep relationship. So PL Tandon, who was our first Indian chairman, was one of the founders along with Ravi Mathai of IIMA. So he was right up there. And the person who is sort of credited along with Professor AK Jain of building the marketing faculty in IIM Ahmedabad is Labdhi Bhandari, who a lot of people, he was an HUL brand manager. So in marketing, in some ways, the IIMA way of thinking and the HUL way of thinking, as I've realized, having been to both, are kind of very similar. And at the heart of it is problem definition. It's always more difficult to define a problem than to solve it. And you can always get people to solve problems. And a lot of our time in our education, a lot of us try and focus on being problem solvers. But the difficult thing is to, as Professor Jain used to say, what is the problem? And I guess that's the big learning. If you ask me that what's the big learning in marketing is, you got to keep asking that question, what's the problem? And I'll give you an example of, when I was in ice creams, where I actually, despite sort of saying this all the time, I failed myself. And I just joined the ice cream business 5-6 years ago, and I was going to Bombay markets, and I found they were small, and I asked people, why don't you keep an ice cream cabinet? And they said, because there's no space. So I said, look, let's go and design a small ice cream cabinet. So we designed this small miniature ice cream cabinet, which we thought was the solution to Bombay outlets. But as we started placing them, we realized that it was 1/3 the capacity, but it was 2/3 the electricity consumption of the regular cabinet. So while it made sense in terms of real estate, it didn't really make sense in terms of the overall economics. So the question I should have asked at that time is, how do I make ice creams profitable for the retailer, not how do I get a cabinet into the retailer? And had I asked that question, I wouldn't have spent the kind of money and had the fiasco that we had with the Chotu cabinets.
Very interesting. And back to your journey, Sudhir, in the context of how you frame your choices, have you sort of found this clarifying in terms of the question you ask leading to a different way of looking at a situation?
I don't know, Deepak. I certainly do a lot of it, and I certainly am very conscious about it, and especially when I'm confused. See, very often, decision-making, and we can talk about it later, is actually the crucial secret sauce of management, and one of the key things that Levers teaches you. And And a good decision, has to be both intuitive and rational. And often when you find these in conflict, that's the right time for you to take a step back and say, what is the problem? What is the real decision I'm making? So when the heart and the mind are not in tango for a decision, that's when you know that you've not really clarified the problem. So that's the way I look at it.
No, the reason I ask is in the context of the work I do, sometimes I tell leaders, who are in transition, what are you solving for?
Yeah.
Are you solving for impact?
Yeah.
Are you solving for harmony across domains of life?
Yeah.
Or are you solving for something else? And that determines choices.
That's right.
So till you have that clarity around what you're
And
solving
it's hard.
for.
I'm saying to raise the question, but all of us, and it's a very, very hard thing, and it's not an obvious answer on what the problem is. In fact, that's the hard work. And once that is answered, then everything is quite easy after that.
True. This is your host, Deepak Jayaraman here. The point that Sudhir makes about asking the right question is quite a profound one, and something that came up in one of my earlier conversations at the podcast with Tasha Eurich. Tasha is one of the leading thinkers in the space of enhancing self-awareness and the author of the book Insight. One of the paradoxes here is that you would think that people who reflect a lot would be quite self-aware, but often they go down what she calls the rabbit hole of rumination. And she goes on to speak about how we should conduct the inquiry and frame the question.
And so what we wanted to do in our study was understand, okay, if why is the wrong question, what is the right question? What are these unicorns doing differently than the rest of us? And it took us a little while to find this pattern, but we discovered that when unicorns introspected, they almost never asked why questions. They asked what questions. And at first I thought that's just a weird sort of fluke or a weird nuance. But as we started to look into it, it started to make a huge amount of sense. So one example would be, going back to the question, why didn't I get that promotion? Unicorns, if they were in that situation, wouldn't ask themselves that question. Here's some questions they might have asked instead. What did I learn that can help me be better positioned in the future? Or what can I do to close the gap between, where I thought I was and where I need to be? Or what support can I enlist from the people around me to help me, achieve this goal the next time I set it? Or going back to why am I so upset about that conversation with my coworker? They might instead ask, well, what part of that situation did I own? Or what can I do differently in the future to avoid that kind of conversation with that person? And so what we found was asking what instead of why really helps us avoid so many of the pitfalls of introspection, where we're excavating for the truth that we're never going to find, and we're focusing on our problems and feeling victimized and disempowered.
To know more, you can go to playtopotential.com and tune into my conversation with Tasha. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Sudhir Sitapati. And back to your journey, Sudhir, we spoke about this some time back as well. You've been in HUL for 2 decades. And when we did the inventory from our batch, maybe you and a couple of others have been in the same institution for that long, and all the others have moved on. How have you thought about staying on in HUL?
Yeah.
I'm sure there were moments in time where you got those calls about opportunities elsewhere.
Yeah.
Give us a sense of, what is it about institutions like HUL which give you an opportunity to pursue a 20-year career and beyond?
Yeah.
And also tell us a little bit about how you've thought about some of those moments in time where you could have possibly branched off.
I think HUL is among the few organizations that do tend to have a lot of people staying on for a lot of time. And if a lot of people stay on for a lot of time, notwithstanding some of the daily sort of irritations with every job, it means broadly you're happy. I mean, that's broad. I think HUL does a few things right. I think it has excellent HR processes, I would say. It has excellent training processes early on in your career, and it has excellent career management and career development wherein you're learning throughout. So you're kind of constantly building on yourself. And I think that's one of the reasons that this really strong, and there are some, one can say that, careers are structured, it's a bit slower, et cetera. But broadly, I would say this HR system, when you take a step back, is outstanding. As a consequence of this HR system, I think there's a lot of camaraderie among the people. So you kind of work with friends, so you enjoy coming to work. there is also a lot of very bright people here, so that is also something you like. And there are shared experiences, early experiences in HUL. One of the differentiating factors in HUL versus any company in the world, actually, there are very few which give such a tough early experience when you're just a sort of greenhorn out of a business school and, you think you know it all. And those shared experiences also kind of form a bonding. And I suspect finally the values of the company are of very, very high quality. So you go to sleep feeling good about yourself. I guess these are in general terms, these are the reason why it's not just me. It's a lot of people who last for long periods of time. There haven't been that many moments where I've thought about leaving. Once or twice I have. And I guess the reason that I've never left is there were always rational reasons to leave, never emotional reasons to leave. So emotionally, I was always happy and fulfilled and so on and so forth. Somebody might have come with a salary which was higher or a job which seemed like a higher status, etc., etc. So the rational mind works, but it's again going back to a decision. The heart and the mind have to sync, and for me anyway, they haven't been in sync yet.
And the other reason I ask is, in an organization as large as HUL, sometimes you could get opportunities where it's a smaller company, but it's a CEO role. And leaders sometimes struggle to think about, business head in a large company versus the company head of a smaller company. So how do you think about that?
DJ, again, to be honest, it's a slightly rational question, right? Which is, I guess you just have to feel it at some point. You got to feel at some point that, this game is up here, or you got to move on. And it need not be for a CEO of a smaller company. It could well be for a business head of a big company. So I just feel that that has to click. And maybe, in conversation with you in the past as well, transition moments, they have to work here and they have to click. So. And
picking up on the point around HR, Sudhir, one of the things you talk about in the book is that HR here has teeth. That's one thing you say. And the other thing that I found interesting was back to the point around shared experiences. You say that the first 10 to 12 years in HUL are like an IAS or a government services kind of a tenure-based career plan, after which high potentials take off and there's an opportunity to differentiate yourself. Talk to us a little bit about both these. One is about what do you mean by HR has teeth? And second is why is it that HUL has a sort of interesting approach of 10 to 12 years of predictable career path and then variability?
HR in HUL does indeed have teeth, and I think there are 2 or 3 reasons. It's an independent function in HUL. At the same time, a lot of the HR managers have had the same shared experiences that business folks have had. They've gone through the same management trainee. Their first stint is also in a factory or in a sales branch. So they kind of have seen through the same shared experiences while being an independent function. We've also historically and at a very early stage had HR as an independent function from business. Many companies in the past would have someone who was a technical person or a supply chain person kind of becoming the HR head. Not so much anymore. But HUL very early on had independent HR functions and independent HR professionals. So HR has also been one of the functions which HUL has really developed in a sort of professional sense in India. So this, high quality independent HR guys and then an HR system which is deeply embedded in the business. So independent on one hand, but close to the business on one hand, has kind of meant that we've had a strong HR system that shows the mirror to organizations. I think that's what HR has to do. It doesn't always happen, but most often or very often it does.
And give us a sense of how it plays out when you say show the mirror, make it real for us.
I'm saying, for example, I can't just recruit someone to be a subordinate in my team heading a large business. It doesn't work like that. Ultimately, I'm the final decision maker on people who have to be recruited who report to me. But there is a strong process. There will be a process where HR will bring out CVs of all the candidates. HR will have a strong view. They will insist I interview. Most often an HR person will sit in the interview and they can disagree with me on paper. And if they really strongly disagree, they escalate it. So while I have a sort of nodal function in recruiting my own team, I don't have unfettered freedom. And I think that's the right thing. I don't think in professional organizations, people should have unfettered freedom.
And back to your point about sometimes the one line of thinking could be people with technical background who have a people orientation could do well in HR because it sort of gives them a sense of how business is done.
Yeah.
So when you say people in HR, of course, they go through the stint, so they build an appreciation of business. How do you see the trade-off here?
I mean, I don't have a definitive answer for this, and I'm sure there are experts who view it, but I personally feel with the experience of HUL that HR, like marketing or, is not just a flair. Somebody has an HR flair, so you move them. It is a discipline. You have to learn it. You have to go through IR relations. You have to see a branch. You have to business partner someone. You have to work in rewards. So, you got to see the full rotation. Yes, it's very good to have a people sort of flair, like people have a marketing flair, but I think it's a lot more than that. So I would personally, and I guess the jury is out, but I would personally put my sort of money behind an HR function.
I hear you. And back to your point about the career path, sort of the 10 to 12 years of, let's say, steady pace, after which there's acceleration and deceleration. What's the thinking behind that?
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting thinking. A lot of youngsters sometimes get frustrated with it in HUL. They see their peers early on doing better, going to Europe, traveling business class, whereas they're in some market in some remote corner of India. And even salaries, they move gradually in HUL. So there is always this sort of feeling that, is this meritocratic? Why is everyone getting the same output? I think it's actually strongly meritocratic. I think one of the strengths of HUL, and I guess the market recognizes it's strongly meritocratic, I think we just don't judge too early. I think there's a full 10 years in which is almost like a extended training. Of course, you have your appraisals, and of course, people are valuing you from a very early age for potential. It's not that you're not being valued even for potential at an early age and so on and so forth. But the thinking is that you do let's take sales and marketing, which is the function that I'm in. You do do a stint in sales, you do a stint in operational marketing, you do a stint in strategic marketing, which is a roughly 8-10 year sort of thing. And then you're fully groomed to kind of go to the next level. And that's really when serious differentiation comes in. I think it prevents, and I think it's a big thing. You should not create heroes too soon, especially in junior management. Results are impacted by many external factors. Of course, and it's not easy to differentiate. And even if it's you, people should get the time. So building heroes and villains too fast is probably not the right thing. And I think the HUL batch system of having batch parity for a reasonable period of time, roughly. And it's not that we have exact batch parity that everybody gets promoted the same day and all. There is differentiation and there is, of course, flexibility, but broadly looking at it as sort of time-bound for a period of time and then really sort of accelerating or not, I would say is a prudent way of doing it.
And back to, let's say talent retention as a challenge. During the 10-12 year phase when your peers are taking off and you're sort of chugging along at a sort of a seemingly slow pace, what do you do to ensure that these people don't leave for the wrong reason and they take that long-term view? How do you approach that?
Yeah. So, then here's the paradox, which is why you're probably doing the right thing, right? I mean, you don't give the acceleration of 10 years, but you still have very high retentions and you still have people going on for a long time. I think the environment, the camaraderie and the sort of learning environment and a collegial environment, you see the campus here it's almost like a college. It's a good thing and a bad thing, and I'll tell you what's the negative of it. But HUL then forms a universe for you in the first 10, 12 years. That's the advantage of it. So you're living in the universe, you're judging yourself versus this, and it's a big enough universe to kind of live in it, if you can call it a bubble if you want, but it's a universe in itself. The con of it is that after a certain age, we've got to be really aware in HUL that we're not too inward looking and that there is a wide, big world outside HUL. And that could be a sort of con of the HUL way of management if one doesn't sort of take care of it and is not conscious of it.
When you say inward looking, in what sense?
For the same reason, it's a large self-sufficient universe. You can have a lot of your friends from HUL. Your social life is HUL. Your conversations. You have so many categories within HUL that, ice cream is very, very far from Lakme. So you can go and spend some time with the Lakme guys and learn about cosmetics. So there's enough learning in this world. So that's why it can, if you're not careful, become a little inward looking.
Understood. The other term you use in the book, Sudhir, which I found interesting, was the notion of entrepreneur professionals. And in a way, most professional organizations are struggling with this issue. How do you drive entrepreneurship? And several entrepreneurs are struggling with it too, in terms of how do you bring professional behavior while retaining entrepreneurship. So talk to us about what you mean by this term. And a little bit around how HUL thinks about fostering this behavior.
So this was a term, I asked several CEOs of several companies, what is it in HUL that makes so many of you CEOs? So I asked Gopal Vittal this, who's the CEO of Airtel, and he gave me 2 or 3, but the word that he used was entrepreneur professional. A professional is relatively easy for a multinational to understand, right? Professional means that you follow the process, you follow the rule. That is the etymology of professional. I think the entrepreneurship is a relatively rarer quality. And I was thinking about what is it in HUL that makes people entrepreneur. I think there are a couple of them. One is we get high quality people who are driven to succeed and output oriented. And they're not just people who want to bide their time in the organization. So they want to push. I mean, by nature, culture reinforces itself. So you're always having people pushing, saying, how do I grow faster and how do I so on and so forth. I think the second thing is a lot of us have very early exposure to Indian retail trade at a very young age. Our distributors and retailers are the most entrepreneurial, most business-like people. So, and you spend the first 3-4 years, day in and day out, dealing with really hardcore entrepreneurs who are really sort of, looking at very capital focused. I mean, entrepreneurs are fundamentally capital focused. These guys are capital focused, rotation focused. So you come out of sales with a mindset on business which is highly sort of entrepreneurial. I think these are the 2 reasons that, and I think it is a self-reinforcing thing. I think culture is reinforcing. And once the culture sets up. See, there was also a period, and I must go back to Unilever itself was a unique multinational. Most multinationals, even today, have a command and control operation. They have headquarters somewhere and then things radiate from that. In the early 1950s, we had a chairman of Unilever called Hayworth who wanted to do something called ization. He said that Unilever will only grow when the far corners of the world we have local management. So India, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, it's not just India. Very early on, it was one of the first multinationals to have Indian CEOs. So in the early 60s, we had P.L. Tandon, who was an Indian. So this sort of giving freedom to the operating units at an early stage has also sort of started this self-reinforcing entrepreneurship.
Got it. And you speak about the early exposure to trade and sort of coming from a professional background, being reinforced by the processes in the company, but exposed to entrepreneurship. But in the way business is run or the way reviews are done, are there reinforcing mechanisms in terms of, you give me a sense of how this gets built at the start, but give me a sense of how this gets reinforced as you grow. Is there something about the way you conduct business or the way you conduct meetings or reviews which reinforces this entrepreneurial professionalism?
One of the interesting things about entrepreneurial professionalism is if you ask people within Unilever, they won't call us entrepreneurial. But when you ask CEOs outside, they call us entrepreneurial. And we look at the company at a distance, you find it entrepreneurial. And I'll give you an example which I found was a great example that someone gave me of entrepreneurship. And then I'll answer your question after that. There was a guy called V. Kasturi Rangan, who in the 1980s, he's an IIMA graduate, he built the personal products business of levers. And several people I spoke to said he was so passionate about building sachets and shampoos that he would carry sachets and shampoos in his coat or on the back of his car. And if he saw an outlet when he was going with the sales guys that didn't have a shampoo sachet, he would firstly sort of, give hell to the sales manager, but take it off his coat and go and hang it there himself. Now, this is the kind of reinforcement of, and what I've also realized in the company is that the stories that the company, and I guess that's the answer to your question, because I don't think there are any processes that encourage entrepreneurship. And I think there are processes that encourage professionalism, but there are stories that encourage entrepreneurship.
That's a great insight.
So, all the conversations that you have when lever people sit together and drink will be about these mavericks and how they entrepreneurially built this company at various points in time. And I think that's the combination of the stories and process, which, and I think that's what builds it.
Got it. This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. I wanted to pause and talk about an earlier conversation at the podcast with Indranil Chakraborty, another alumnus of HUL and the author of the book Stories at Work. He spoke about this instance of the learning that an HUL colleague goes through in early years.
The example that the book starts with gold dust is actually not my story. It is a story that was told to me more than 25 years ago by Mukul Dioras, who's just been appointed the chairman of Colgate in India. And he tells the story where basically the story goes that he was a young trainee and he had gone into a market visit. He had met a boy at a wholesale store, the wholesaler's son, and he observed that the shop there was selling the Hindustan Unilever products at a very wafer thin margin. And so, having come from the MBA college that he had come from, he straight away went into, you'll never make money with that thin margin that you have. So the young boy said, no, I don't think you get it. Yeah, you see, let me explain my business dynamics, or whatever words he must have used in the Hindi hinterland. And he said that I have 2 weeks of stock with me. Yeah, and your distributor gives me 1 week of credit. So my net investment is 1 week. Yeah, and we have 52 weeks. So my investment turns 52 times. And if each time I turn that investment, I get 0.5%, which is what he kept. That's 26% ROI. What's wrong with it? Yeah, and that's what Mukul says, that so the business runs not because of absolute margins, but the number of times you turn that margin. And so every time the wheel turns, it gathers a bit of gold dust. So that's the gold dust example.
If you want to learn more about how you can build culture through stories, do tune into my conversation with Indranil Chakraborty at playtopotential.com. If you're finding this conversation purposeful, do rate and review on Apple Podcasts. It will help others discover the podcast and seek value from it. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Sudhir Sitapati.
Going back to one of the things you said, Sudhir, I wanted to pick up on it, this notion of potential. You said something interesting. You said for the first 10, 12 years, it's not that people don't notice. You're still marked for potential, but you possibly aren't, there isn't, let's say, enough maybe celebration or applauding going on. So I'm curious about that. But just maybe a related question is, in the book you talk about judgment, influence, and drive being the 3 markers of potential. Yeah. But what I found interesting was you go on to say that for the first few years, it's drive, which is sort of the key axis of growth or differentiation, and then it moves to influence, and eventually it's judgment. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about this notion of how potential plays out in Unilever, and I'm curious about these inflection points where sort of the needle moves from drive to influence to judgment.
Yeah. I wrote about judgment, drive, and influence in the context of recruiting people. Because if you recruit for the immediate job at junior management in industry, right, and it's different from professional services, and there's a very vast difference between professional services and industry. In industry, at junior levels, you need drive. But if you recruit the best person for the job, you're not recruiting for the future. So when we recruit management trainees, we have to recruit for junior management, middle management, and senior management. We expect every manager of ours. So at a very early age, we've got to see whether this guy's got the potential to have judgment. Does she have the potential to be influential? Though in the first 5 years, all that's going to determine success. And one of the reasons also we don't judge too early is that all that the first 7-8 years tells you beyond a point is, or heavily over-indexes on the fact of how driven you are. And it's, only over a period of time that you start working as a team, and that's really where influence comes. And even after that, where you got to start making decisions. It's one of the reasons why we don't promote too early, because if you promote too early, you're promoting on drive. And you're not promoting, and then, a person will hit a barrier very fast and may not have either influencing or judgment skills. So I think that's the important thing on judgment, drive, and influence. I think there are natural inflection points for these within HUL, DJ. I think the first 8-9 years, we call it work level 2, which is kind of where people are really sort of it's heavily, driven. And as you go a little bit more and more senior, you get some influence and judgment. I guess, in middle management, what we call work level 3, which is generally 10 to 15, 17 years, is where you sort of have to work together as an organization with various functions and other people and get work done. And I guess at senior management, really the success or failure depends on, do you get 7 out of 10 decisions? I used to have a boss who said that anybody who gets 9 or 10 out of 10 decision makers is a bad decision maker.
Not taking enough risk.
A good decision maker has to get 7. He has to get the right 7, but that's the right ratio. 5 is too low, 9 is too high. So
9 too high being too safe. Is that the point?
I think it's too safe. You're analyzing too much. You're not quick enough on the decision. There is a speed factor to it.
Interesting.
You got to make those 7 have to be the important decisions. You got to let go 3 relatively low important decisions. So there's a decision making in taking decisions itself. In that sense.
This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. I must say, this is a matter of cosmic coincidence that something very similar came up in my conversation with Sudhir's brother, Vinay Sitapati, who's written the biography of the former Indian Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, Half Lion. For the record, I must mention that Sudhir and Vinay are the only siblings who've appeared at different times on the podcast. One of these days, I need to chat with their mother about what she fed them when they were young, but that's possibly a different podcast conversation for a different day. Coming back, Vinay speaks about Narasimha Rao's genius in knowing when not to make a decision.
See, Narasimha Rao is made a lot of fun of because the typical view of Narasimha Rao was, look, he's a scholar, but he doesn't act. And that's just a straight untruth. As I show you in the book, yes, he was a scholar, but at heart, he was a man of action, right? What he also was acutely aware of his political vulnerabilities. So when he didn't act, it was not because he didn't want to act, and not because, not acting was important, but because he just lacked the political ability, right? Sometimes it was that not acting is important, right? Not making a decision is important, right? But very often he just lacked the political ability that he could have made the decision. He could have made the decision to privatize Air India, right? Which today we're trying to do. But at that time he would have lost his job. So he didn't make a decision on the matter, right? So the stereotype of Narasimha Rao is which comes from that idea, analysis until paralysis. That would be the joke. And the joke was Narasimha Rao knew how to be silent in 10 languages, right? And I think that misses, something at the core of Narasimha Rao, that he was a man of action, right? But he was also acutely aware that, as the book points out, he lacked power. So his genius was he knew where to act, under which political cover, and when he lacked political cover, he would withdraw. And it's a fine art, right? Because most politicians, you would argue, only care about survival. Narasimha Rao cared about survival, but he also cared about other things.
What decisions to focus on is a decision indeed, and whether to make a decision or not is a decision too. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Sudhir Sitapati.
But a couple of questions. One is, what are the markers you look for, given that you're recruiting for judgment, influence, and drive?
Yeah.
Give us a sense of how do you pick them up? How do you suss them out early on, number one? Even at a recruiting stage, for example, number one. And number two, how do you think about the leadership development mix when you're solving for each of these 3 variables? Not that it's sort of one at a time, but I'm curious how that shifts as the axis of growth shifts.
Yeah. See, one of the big determinants of drive actually is excellence in your educational or co-curricular activity. It doesn't actually determine judgment in Indian circumstances, but it certainly determines drive, and academic is an important part of it, but exceptional performance anywhere is a tick mark on drive for us. I think when we do the lever way of recruitment, we still are one of the old-fashioned companies that do group discussions, and people think that group discussions are a problem-solving forum. They're not a problem-solving forum, they're a teamwork forum. So what we judge in group discussions is not whether you're the guy who cracked the case, but you're the guy who facilitated someone else to crack the case. How was the team dynamic, and that's what we're looking for. I guess in judgment is what we look in the personal interviews. We generally tend to ask questions regarding decisions that a person has made in life and how they think through decisions. How intuitive are they? How analytical are they? So that's what we do. But there's a 4th thing, Deepak, which is even more important. One of our former Unilever chairman, I found in our annual reports, it said that you got to recruit for character and caliber. And between the two, character is far more important than caliber. So judgment, drive, and influence are determinants of caliber, but there is a more important variable, which is character, which we actually have a fourth interview where senior people interview. So ours is a 4-step recruitment process where CV, group discussion, interview 1 and interview 2, which people say, why do you have such a long process? It's to judge. And the final one, we have senior people to see whether the person's got a character and high integrity, which for us is actually the most important.
And how do you, maybe just persisting with the theme, and for somebody, let's say, who's a student, how do you suss that out?
I think, authenticity and willing to share vulnerability in an interview, willing to sort of look deep inside. See, what do we mean by integrity? We're not judging whether a person is going to cheat the expense statement, right? The question that we're judging is a person true to themselves? When they make a mistake, are they able to kind of reflect and say it was their mistake rather than externalize? That's integrity at the end of the day. So what we look for is people who are a little bit thoughtful about themselves, who have a good, idea of what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so, so that's really how at least I suss out sort of the integrity of a person. And that's what I mean by integrity.
No, this reminds me of my previous firm, Egon Zender. When you would do your 20-30 rounds with colleagues around the world, then the man himself would meet you in his office in Zurich. And that chat would be about just anything, right? About opera, about the world climate and whatever. So I guess in a way, I like the way you frame it as caliber versus character. By that time,
I didn't frame it. A former Unilever chairman framed it. Okay. But I caught on to the framing.
Got it. Now, just coming back to the sort of the bread and butter, let's say, themes for which HUL is known for marketing. And I'm in the context of the work I do, I'm curious about how that plays out with individuals and personal brands.
Yeah.
Give us a sense of how some of the principles around marketing and branding can be applied to leaders as leaders go about their respective journeys. And as an observer of the world around you, what are some of the, let's say, I won't say funny things, but what are some of the inefficiencies you see in the way sometimes people think about personal brands?
Yeah. So, DJ, I haven't actually, to be honest, thought deeply about personal brands, right? It's not an area that I have. But let me tell you about brands, and let's see if there are some parallels between brands and personal brands. One of the things that great brands have is that people who love the brand and people who hate the brand must say the same thing about it. That is the mark of a true outstanding brand. So you may not like the things that people who like it, people who hate it may not like the same things, but they say the same thing. So a brand, as I've written in the book, is...
Give me an example here, sorry, just for me to get a sense of what you're saying.
So, let's say, let's take a strong brand that I worked on, let's say Lifebuoy. People who love it will say it's got the strong smell, which is really sort of disinfectant, and I love it. It makes me feel really clean and hygienic. And guys who hate it will say it's this strong smell and it's disinfectant, and I really feel like I'm in a hospital.
They'll align on the attribute.
They will align on the attribute. So they will say the same things about it, but they may like it or they may not like it, right? So that's the characteristic of really, really powerful. It's a good way to judge brands, and I suspect that's the same about personal brands as well. You cannot be different things to different people. That's the principle of branding. You have to be the same thing to everybody, whether they like you or not. And therefore, you got to choose those few attributes or those few associations you want to own. Close your eyes, whether it's a personal brand or a real brand, you'll be able to identify people in 3-4 words. Then they're strong brands. They have to be authentic. They have to be true also to their, one of the things I do a lot when I do brand work, DJ, is we do something called brand archaeology, which is go into the deep history, and many of our brands are very old, the deep history of the brand, the founder, and what was the vision with which it was founded, and what was that sort of birthing qualities of the brand. Because they tend to be the true qualities of a brand that, 70, 80, 100 years later, and you've got to kind of rediscover it. And I think that's the truth about personal brands. I'm not an expert, as I tell you, but as I'm talking about it, I guess you've just got to go within. You can't game it and say, what will that person like and what will this person like and how can I be? You got to understand what it is that you are. And whatever it is that you are, if you are true to it, people ends up liking you. I mean, so, I think that, and that's true about brands. The sharper they are, you'll always have people respecting you. They may not choose you, or they may choose something else. But I guess those are the parallels.
But I love the point around archaeology.
Yeah.
It's a cumulative and not an incremental.
That's right.
It's you can't sort of ignore the past.
That's right.
And sort of create it de novo.
But one of the things I think is true about personal brands and real brands is, and it's one of those paradoxes, which is, levers and marketing are going to be consumer obsessed, but ultimately brands have to turn inward. They have to be what they are, and then they have to attract a set of consumers towards them. So I guess that's the same about if you're gaming who you're talking to all the time in your mind, how do I be to this person, how do I be to that person, rather than focusing on what you are, you will end up being a weak brand.
That's a great point. I mean, back to the character interview, that brings it back to authenticity, if I may connect the dots. Lovely. And picking up on a similar theme, Sudhir, you talk about growing a category versus growing a brand.
Yeah.
And you frame it as a choice between doing more versus doing better.
Yeah.
And that's something I reflect on as well. In the context of journeys, there's always this choice between specialization and generalization. And maybe trying out adjacencies.
Yeah.
Give us a sense of how you think about this in the context of brands, and maybe reflect on it as you would apply it to journeys.
Yeah, no, I think, Deepak, in the book, I think there are two separate points, and I'll sort of answer them separately, because the first point is, why is it easier to grow a category than to grow market share within a category? And the second point is, why should a brand do what it's doing better rather than doing newer things? There are two separate related but separate questions. I think the first question is that an category growing represents an unsolved consumer problem. Gaining market share represents a problem that is already solved, and you're trying to go and get a piece of the cake, right? So from a consumer point of view, it's always easier and better and sort of more profitable, and in whichever way you look at it, solving an unsolved problem rather than someone solved the problem already and you're trying to solve 5% that problem 5% better. This is why it's generally easier and better to build categories and bake your own pie rather than take a piece of someone else's pie, as a general rule of principle. The second point is that within brands, it is always better for a brand to do what it does better rather than to do many things. And it goes back to the question on what brands are and what brands are fundamentally. Brands, if they're a set of associations, you've got 3 or 4 pieces of real estate in consumers' minds. And the consumers' minds is the most expensive place and difficult piece of real estate to get. Now, what your job is to deepen those associations and sort of really have them stronger. A new association, the cost of doing it is always much higher than the cost of deepening an association. So, and also when you get new associations in, you start weakening the older associations.
Give us an example here.
So, I gave an example in a book. When I was a management trainee, I worked in the foods category. And for a brief while. And I saw that what sold in the market was basically Kisan tomato ketchup and Kisan mixed fruit jam. It was 80 to 90% of our business. 20 years later I came, or 18 years later I came as the director of the foods business. And when I looked at our foods business, it was still 90% of tomato ketchup and mixed fruit jam. In that interim, we had launched many things as Kisan. We had launched Kisan soy juice, we had launched Kisan staples, we had launched Kisan health food drinks, etc., etc. But the fact is that in consumers' minds, Kisan was this fruits and vegetable brand, and it wasn't anything else. And guess what? Less than 15% of Indians consume Kisan. So the same amount of money, had we spent deepening those associations and gone from 15 to 30, we would have been a lot better off rather than trying to get new associations with Kisan. So there's always an unsolved problem in what you're doing well, and to do more of it. Very rarely, there might be a 10% chance that, you're kind of hitting a wall, but 9 out of 10 times there's always more room, and it's always easier to win where you are rather than to sort of go wide.
And if you reflect on that in the context of your journey or professional choices, is there a parallel in terms of how you think about that over time?
I think, quite early on, probably in IIMA itself, I kind of sort of doubled in on the fact that marketing was something I was good at and something that I enjoyed. And I've kind of broadly, despite a lot of distractions here and there, and you know how things are, you can always get distracted. I like building consumer brands. I like doing advertising. I like sort of doing innovation. So I've kind of kept myself focused on these areas. And with time, I've also realized that, I kind of enjoy it. And I've kind of stuck to that journey rather than learning too many new tricks.
But if I may go back to that and persist, what gave you that conviction? I remember back in '99 when a lot of us were running around like headless chickens saying, we'll get into a bank or a consulting firm or something else that pays the big bucks.
Yeah.
You had extraordinary clarity that this was it.
Yeah.
What gave you that conviction at that point?
No, I think, I must say that my father, I was fortunate who was, he was a generation into the corporate world. He was in L&T, he had worked in banks. So he had a good sense of the world after you join, after 10 years, 20 years. So I think he was, one of the few things he was very clear about was that I joined Levers. He also felt that I should do marketing. He knew me well. So he was actually one of those guys who never really, I was never a good student throughout because he didn't allow me to do tuitions. He never really wanted me to do one thing. But one of the few things he wanted me to do in life was to join Levers. I think he had a high regard for the institution, but I think he also saw it. And I must say that at IIMA, so I actually got into Levers before I joined IIMA, and I didn't take it, though my dad wanted me to join Levers.
Oh, is that so?
So when I was in Xavier's, they recruited management trainees.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
And he wanted me to take it, but I said no, but he was still keen, so I did my summers in Levers. And I also, once I kind of, so on the one axis, there was a push there, and then I guess Professor AK Jain's marketing one did create a pull. So I did get fascinated by him and the clarity of thought and sort of the deep rigor, because a lot of people, come in thinking, marketing is fluff, but, AK Jain was anything but that. It was just because it's not numbers all the time, it doesn't mean you can't have depth of thinking. So I guess those were the two influences that really have kept me going in.
And if I may persist further, what gave your father that conviction that HUL was the right thing for you? What about HUL appealed to him?
See, he had a belief that he was an old-fashioned guy. So he had a belief that the first job a person does, he was an engineer, he was an IT engineer, should either be in the shop floor or in the market. So it was an old-fashioned view. And it's a 100% right view. These things don't go out of fashion. I don't think, I can say it as many times, I don't think young people should work in air-conditioned offices on Excel sheets for the first 4 or 5 years of their life. So he was very clear that that foundation of being out in the sort of heat, so it was a value system of his.
Fascinating. Moving to another marketing concept that you talk about in the book, the 4 Ps of marketing that we talk about. And you say that product is the sort of the most significant P of the 4 Ps. Now, I've been in professional services all my life.
Yeah.
So as I was reading it, I was just curious about how this plays out, not in a product context, but in a services context.
Yeah.
So for a minute, if you could talk a little bit about, why do you say product is the most important P?
Yeah.
But also reflect on how this sort of maybe transposes to a services world.
Yeah. See, firstly, in Levers, the marketing is a central function. So you kind of see the entire spectrum of what the consumer value is. And one of the interesting things is whatever function I was doing, I always felt that was the most important P. So when I was in sales, I thought, place or distribution is the most important P. Then when I went to sort of, more operational marketing, I thought promotions were really important. Then I thought advertising was important. Then I thought pricing was important. And I kind of finally netted this out with lots of good and bad experiences, saying that if you get your product right, the results will come. If you do other things right, they may come sooner. And if you don't do them right, they may come later. But if you do product wrong, it will never come. And if you do product right, you might have to be patient, but it will eventually come. And I've just had innumerable cases seeing it. And I guess you need to have that clarity, because if you focus too much on the so the other P's are enablers of bringing the product. They are not it in itself. And I guess the professional services group that I worked most closely with is advertising agencies. So let me draw a parallel there, because I worked a little bit with management consulting and HR, but this is something I work on a day-to-day basis. So the best advertising agencies are those that deliver the best advertising. They're not the ones that do the best strategy. They're not the ones who do the advertising networks on time. They're the ones who make advertising that people want to watch. So, so when you evaluate an agency, you have to really look at the people who are creating the advertising, and they're really the big value creators for you. So I guess that's true about every profession. And word spreads around fast. I mean, we call it word of mouth. But if the product is good, somehow word gets around. So I don't know how you draw a conclusion into your world, but...
Fair enough. The other piece you talk about, which is often confused, or people mix it up, is this notion of core competence and competitive advantage. And you talk about sales and branding and a couple of other things in the context of HUL.
Yeah.
So give us an insight into how do you think about the distinction between these two, and talk to us about how these play out in a Unilever context.
It's an interesting story. As a management trainee, we are sent to Eta, which is a village outside UP, in UP, into a village where we stay for 6 weeks. We basically live with the farmer there and eat his food. And on Saturday morning, we are allowed to come back to Eta town, where we had to stay in a guest house of a doctor, a local doctor. And the local doctor's son was a sort of self-educated guy. He was autodidact. He was not an MBA like us. And he told me, he said, you guys in Levers, I meet all of you. You guys keep telling me that your core competence is distribution. That's not your core competence. Your core competence is understanding consumer needs and making products. Your competitive advantage is you go to more outlets, but someone can do it tomorrow better than you, can go to the same number of outlets. That doesn't mean you will shut down. You're ultimately, he said, very interesting. He said, you guys are a chemical engineering firm and you got to understand that's your core competence.
Wow.
So I think the interesting story is that this guy was just not in the circuit that would sort of say that he was reading these kind of things all the time in his free time and running some small business there in Eta.
Uh-huh.
So it stayed with me. I mean, you got to ask that question all the time as to what's that fundamental truth about a company without which it will fail. And I think in the case of Levers, it is understanding consumer needs and giving brands to solve those needs. That's the heart of our gig. Everything else, again, is an enabler. So, good supply chain, efficient costs, good media, all of that, even good advertising, but that's the heart of what we do. So
Got it. Back to the discussion around people. The other very interesting and possibly borderline counterintuitive insight was you talking about Mavericks, company men and rogues.
Yeah.
And more specifically, HUL's treatment of Mavericks.
Yeah.
And you go on to say that sometimes companies get too harsh with these people, and that's a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
So talk to us about what you mean by these terms and more specifically how HUL deals with some of these Mavericks.
It's a bit like the entrepreneurship point where it's common, kind of gripe within the organization to say we're not entrepreneurial enough. And there's a common gripe within the organization, and a lot of people repeat it, saying this is a clone organization. Everybody is the same. And that's how that's the starting point, right? But when I actually started speaking to people about HUL and people who've been, joined in the 50s to now, a lot of the conversation actually came up, and people who were idealized were people who were mavericks. I mean, I gave you the example of V. Kasturirangan, but there were several others like this. So, and they were able to associate those mavericks with distinct periods of great success of the company, and they were able to attribute it to those people. So I think the interesting thing about HUL is that a lot of people look the same and speak the same language, but there is this a group of people who aren't the same and who are still allowed to flourish in the company. And it's not that easy in a lot of multinationals for that to happen. And I was speaking to a consultant friend of mine, and I was telling him, look, this is what I found. I found a lot of the successes I'm able to attribute to people, and people who have and did very well. They didn't go to the very top of HUL, I must tell you, but they did pretty much near the top. And he said a lot of companies, it's fashionable to over-index on teamwork, and ultimately what's important is output. Teamwork's an input, right? So you can't. It's not an end in itself. So this sort of, and again, I guess it goes back, DJ, to this collegial camaraderie and this group of people who are there together in a sort of almost familial sense. So unless someone lacks integrity and rogues, which the company has again traditionally had very strong value systems on, and they kind of get ejected, there's a reasonable amount of tolerance for these, may not be great team players, but value creators, and a lot of respect for them as well. So, I think that's I mean, as I spoke to people, I think it's a relatively unique secret sauce of HUL. It's not obvious because people look the same educational background and so on. But you think about it, it sort of ties in with the entrepreneur professional argument. In fact, I think it is the secret sauce. If I were to kind of
very interesting, and maybe to make it real, Sudhir, what are the moments of truth, and what are the kind of situations where you need to be patient or tolerant with Mavericks? What's the friction that you need to live with for Mavericks to flourish?
reason that HUL is able to tolerate and live with Mavericks for a long time, again, goes back to some of the HR processes. I think there are strong meritocratic evaluation processes, and a lot of the KPIs are quite output driven. Now, some organizations find it hard to have output-driven KPIs by the very nature of what they do. I think one of the advantages in the business that we are in is at senior management again. One is we're able to, since again it goes back to some of the earlier points, which is since you give a lot of latitude for the first 10 years and you're really evaluating people in the first 10 years, sort of Mavericks, coast along. And that's really where Mavericks really have the most friction early on, right? Once they come to senior management where judgment starts to play a role, Mavericks tend to be good decision makers. So it allows the Mavericks to come to middle management or senior management and then flourish. I think it's got good output related KPIs where if you're bringing in the bacon, there's a reasonable amount of tolerance. So I would say it's a combination of these two, but probably the first one. Probably what, one of my former bosses, he calls it, I think he calls it a empathetic meritocracy, which is not a hard meritocracy. If you have a hard meritocracy in investment banks or whatever, as you are 2 years and then you're out, it won't have tolerance for Mavericks. Because early on when things can't get attributed, people who conform get more attribution than those who don't conform. That's what happens early on, right? So the fact that you don't evaluate for 10 years or you don't hard evaluate and you're kind of supportive throughout, I think that's probably what when I think about it more than the sort of KPI thing, I think this is probably why it's like a family which allows the sort of black sheep of the family to still be till suddenly, you discover a talent of that person and suddenly somewhere it flourishes, So that's probably why.
Got it.
This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. This reminds me of my conversation with Alan Eagle, the co-author of $1 Trillion Coach, a book that details out the ways and means of Bill Campbell, who coached the who's who of Silicon Valley. That included Steve Jobs, the leadership team at Google, Marissa Mayer, Sheryl Sandberg, and several other leaders. He didn't charge any money for his work, but his work impacted trillions of dollars. He uses the term aberrant geniuses to talk about something very similar to Mavericks that Sudhir speaks about.
Aberrant geniuses often need protection from senior management. We live in an age where individual employees, superstar employees, can have a huge impact, because they can just be so highly leveraged using technology tools, especially if you're in the technology business, where, in places like Google, superstar software engineers and product managers can just have enormous impact. They can create whole new product categories. And lots of times they can be difficult, but if managed and coached properly, they can have enormous impact, both to the bottom line, to your product suite, but also to your culture. You need to protect those people because sometimes they are difficult and the culture may want to push them out. So, one of the first lessons I think of aberrant geniuses is to do your best to protect them if they have a few key characteristics correct. And what would those be? One is integrity. You of course cannot tolerate lying, abusive behavior, harassment, anything like that. Of course, that can't be tolerated. Two, and this is something Bill would always look for, and I think is super important, is a team first mentality.
Clearly something for organizations to think about in terms of how they handle Mavericks or aberrant geniuses. If you're deriving value from the podcast and want to show your gratitude, please visit the Pay It Forward section at playtopotential.com. I work closely with Antarang Foundation, a not-for-profit that works with thousands of young adults and helps them play to their unique potential by helping them with education, employability skills, improving self-awareness, and industry connects. You can go to playtopotential.com and go to the Pay It Forward section for details. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Sudhir Sitapati.
And just moving to culture, you spoke about culture in the context of entrepreneurial professionals. But in the book, you also talk about the 4 pillars of culture: action, values, courage, and truth. Talk to us a little bit about how these get reinforced on a daily basis.
No, in the early 2000s, we were having a really bad time as a business, and our CEO, chairman at that time, Vinay Banga, came to one of our annual conferences and said, guys, it's time to go back to our values. They're action, caring, courage, and truth. Those were the 4 values, he said. And all of us had a rollicking time with that. So every time in the canteen, we would keep making fun, and it just sounded like jargon, and that's how it sounded. And maybe we could have phrased it better, and sometimes there's something. But, now when I was sort of I interviewed many, many people, and one of the techniques I do in market research is not ask people about the values, but ask them what their favorite memories about HUL, right? What are your stories that you remember? And when I grouped those stories, I found quite perplexingly, and I told Vinay this, and I also sort of admitted to him that I laughed, but a lot of those stories were coming in the buckets of action, which is the same entrepreneur professional thing, caring, which kind of demonstrated itself mainly in terms of employees who are either ill or who pass away in the course of service. Courage, which is standing up, and again goes back to mavericks of standing up to power and speaking truth to power, and truth, which is basic honesty. So these were the 4 stories that came. So people didn't express them as values. I kind of synthesized back to something that I had heard as a young manager. And when I think about some of these stories and why do these 4 values, right? Because values, all companies have values. Enron had written its values all over its offices. Right? It doesn't mean anything, right? It's just management jargon. So values are only values when people speak the call. Even if they don't use the word action, caring, courage, and truth, they must kind of live those values. When I sort of reflected deeply on what is the cause of the values, actually a lot of these are values of Unilever. Unilever itself is a unique company which gave these values to HUL 70, 80 years ago, and then, values reinforced themselves. And Unilever's history itself is interesting because it had, on the one hand, an English company with William Lever, who was he was a really ruthless businessman, eccentric, and a serious philanthropist. And a philanthropist not just in giving money, but he created this place called Port Sunlight, where he was very involved in the well-being of their workers. The Tatas and so on have been inspired by the Port Sunlight model of management. So the genetic code of Lever's has this caring element and this action element coming from its English heritage, and this very Calvinistic Dutch honesty. And truth to power was a Dutch genetic strand that came in. So these are actually values that are pretty true to many of the Unilever companies. I would sort of, in all humility, say that that's probably the reason for HUL having these values.
But back to, let's say, your reaction when Vinay Banga spoke about those values.
Yeah.
Now, for a minute, if we assume that's typically the reaction of people when the leader speaks about values, how do you ensure that from a transmission, in your case, you happened to research for the book and you had the luxury of collecting stories and seeing them fit into these 4 buckets.
Yeah.
But how do you ensure that as a leader, when you're transmitting values, it's not seen as jargon, but it's people live it?
Yeah. So I think there are 2 answers to it. The more superficial answer is it's a kind of branding answer. I think action, courage, caring, and truth could have been better branded. For example, in the organization that I run right now, which is Foods and Refreshments, we have 4 values, and I call it rebellious integrity, which I think is a better way of understanding what integrity means. Integrity doesn't mean following the book. It means sort of questioning the book all the time, but, always doing things which are in the interest of the business. So there is certainly in value speak, because values have become so much jargon, one must think a little bit about how one communicates it. But ultimately, DJ, I think that values should not be communicated. Values, it doesn't actually matter whether people know what the values of the company are and what those words are. They just have to live themselves, and you've got to see enough expressions of it all over the organization. And you've got to be clear as senior management, what is it that the core values of this company that have made it great are? And you have to find enough symbols or signs of it across. So you got to find it. I think it's a mistake to say that, do people repeat the values? Doesn't mean anything, right? But do people live it even if they don't know that those are the company values? And providing you are snooping around the organization enough to know that this is happening at periodic intervals or it's not happening and you're truthful about it, I suspect that's the better way to inculcate.
But if I may persist, how do you get deliberate about perpetuating the values? I hear you that just saying ABCD is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
That's not the way values get transmitted, or even in a family context.
Yeah.
That's not the way kids pick up your values.
Yeah.
But how do you get deliberate as a leadership team to perpetuate these values?
I think there are only two things, DJ. One is recruitment, both into the company and to the teams that you are in. So you must be clear that you must recruit people with the values and character that you're really looking for. And two is you have to live it. I mean, if you live it and your senior teams live it, then everybody sees it. If you don't find enough evidence of it in the organization, you're not living it. You're not doing enough. You might be talking about it, not doing enough about it.
Got it. But I was just wondering, back to our discussion before we started this conversation around stories, if there was sort of a structured approach to, one is sort of living it, of course, that's hygiene.
Yeah.
But in the way that gets percolated through the organization, I was wondering if there was a systematic approach there.
See, I don't know if there's a systematic approach to storytelling, but I think shared tough experiences are generally good cauldrons in which stories emerge. So if you're able, that you can structurally do something about it. If you have people sharing difficult physical experiences or periods of time, etc., rural stints and so on and so forth. Those tend to get camaraderie comes in, people open up, stories come up. So that is something you can. So one of the things that I personally like to do a lot of with my teams is to push them to go to markets and consumers all the time. I think when you're outward facing and have those kind of experiences, go somewhere deep in, meet some consumer somewhere. Those are the kind of, you go with two brand managers, go and they sit and they talk, or you go to the sales guy. There's a really nice story that MK Sharma, who was our former vice chairman and chairman of ICSCI, gave me in the book, which is in those days, we don't have it now. He wrote a long story about how an excellent piece of legal work he had done, and he had cracked some case in Jabalpur, and when he came, he found a letter which was a reprimand letter, which is, he said, the only reprimand letter I got in my life. And it said that you went to Jabalpur, but you didn't go and have dinner at the house of the salesman there.
Wow.
So, that is the, we don't have that tradition anymore, but he sort of made that point saying that it's my only reprimand in my entire, and reprimand is a pretty serious thing, and it was done after doing a really great piece of work.
Lovely, Sudhir. Just as somebody who researched HUL extensively as a part of writing the book, if I may ask, what are the 2-3 things that came as a surprise to you? Of course, there's the HUL that you've sort of lived over the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
And then there's the HUL that you've discovered through the research.
Yeah.
What would you say are the 2-3 things you didn't appreciate enough when you started out writing this book?
I think the thing which at depth that I understood was this entrepreneurship and maverickness about the genetic makeup of this company, which is not obvious when you're in the coalface. Because you think you only see the process, but you don't see the entrepreneurship that a large company like this allows at various points in time. It doesn't allow wanton entrepreneurship, that's also true. That has certainly been something which is new to me. So if you tell people, what's the first thing that you think about levers? They're not going to say entrepreneurship, right? But the fact is you don't survive doing extremely well for 60 years if you don't have entrepreneurship. So that's... The other thing that sort of surprised me was the passion for the companies that people who have long retired or have left the company and are CEOs, they still call it our company. And the remarkable similarity in the stories that they would narrate with respect to the values of the company. So the other thing, which is almost nobody in HUL will know what the official values of the company are, but I have a suspicion that a lot of people live it, and you see it when you kind of go outside. These are the 2 things that surprised me.
So, the pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, DJ.
Thanks so much for making the time, and good luck with the success of the book.
Thank you.
I hope you found the conversation as purposeful as I did. To listen to more content by guest or by topic, please visit playtopotential.com. If you're deriving value from the podcast and want to show your gratitude, please consider paying it forward to Antarang Foundation, a not-for-profit that I work with that helps young kids from challenging backgrounds play to their unique potential. Please visit the Pay It Forward section at playtopotential.com to know how. During the conversation, Sudhir refers to Professor AK Jain of IIMA a few times. I had the fortune of learning from him, and also the privilege of interviewing him in campus in the context of a felicitation that was organized by some of the alumni led by Rama Bijapurkar. During our chat, he spoke at length about his journey, his belief system, philosophy behind his pedagogy, and more. You can just go to YouTube and type AK Jain and my name Deepak Jayaraman, and the video link should pop up.
For me, in the classroom, sky is the limit. If anything needs to be done, that would be afterwards. Because my purpose is very clear. As I kept saying, no? In this course, you are not pushed to the wall, no. You are pushed through the wall. So if you are good enough, you will learn how to fly and not fall down. If you are not good enough, you will go down. So over time, people come up. Everybody has enough capabilities, I say, by and large. There is no serious problem. It's a matter of pushing oneself.
Next up in the podcast is James Clear, the author of the book Atomic Habits. As you go about making New Year resolutions for 2020, hopefully this conversation will help you convert some of these resolutions into sustainable habits.
I like to refer to habits as the compound interest of self-improvement. And what I mean is that the same way that money multiplies through compound interest, the effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them across time. And the challenging part of any compounding process is that the greatest returns are delayed. And so on day 1 or day 10 or day 30, you don't really have very much to show for your effort. The curve only takes off down the line once you hit that hockey stick portion, once it really takes off. And this is exactly what it feels like to build a new habit. Like, what is the difference on day 1 of eating a salad for lunch or eating a burger and fries? Not a whole lot. Like your body looks the same in the mirror at the end of the night. The scale hasn't really changed. You don't really have anything to show for the effort that you're putting in. It's only 2 or 5 or 10 years later that you turn around and it's like, wow, those daily habits really do add up. And so in that way, building habits is kind of like this exponential curve. We think, I'll put a little bit of work in and I'll get a little bit of results. So if I put a lot of work in, then I'll get a lot of results. But really, it's much more about time and letting it work for you. And just getting 1% better each day can count for something very significant in the long run.
Thank you for listening, and look forward to having you tune into some of the subsequent conversations at the Play to Potential podcast. Signing off, this is Deepak Jayaraman here. You can find me at djayaraman on LinkedIn and DPAKJRAMAN on Twitter. To know more about the work I do, you can see the About the Host section at playtopotential.com. Bye now.